Stay with me, because in less than 5 minutes inside Memorial Hospital, a powerful man would go from laughing in a hallway to watching his entire world begin to collapse. The sound came first. Beep, beep, beep. Slow and steady at first, blending with distant elevator chimes and the soft squeak of nurses' shoes against polished floors. Then faster, sharper. Emily Carter froze outside room 814 with one hand resting beneath her 8-month pregnant belly as the fluorescent lights overhead cast pale reflections across the marble hallway. Hospitals always smelled the same. Cold air, fresh coffee somewhere in the distance, disinfectant, fear. At 28 years old, Emily had spent the last 3 days inside Memorial under observation after her doctor noticed signs of elevated stress levels during a routine checkup. You need rest, Dr. Lawson had told her yesterday afternoon while adjusting her chart. No surprises. No stress. Emily almost laughed thinking about it now. No stress. Richard Hayes had made sure of the opposite. 3 years ago, Richard called her the best thing that ever happened to him. 3 years ago, he kissed her forehead during Sunday mornings and held her hand while talking about future children and family vacations in Cape Cod and beach houses overlooking the Atlantic. 3 years ago felt like another lifetime. Now her husband barely looked at her, barely spoke to her, barely pretended. Emily slowly walked toward the nurse's station, feeling a small movement beneath her hand. The baby shifted, tiny, gentle, like a quiet reminder that she wasn't alone. She smiled softly. Easy there, she whispered. Mom's right here. Then she heard the voice. Loud, sharp, familiar. There she is. Emily's smile disappeared instantly. Vanessa Cole leaned against the far wall near the waiting area with crossed arms and a perfect expression that looked almost rehearsed. Everything about Vanessa looked expensive. Perfect blonde hair, designer coat, high heels that clicked against marble with every step she took. Behind her stood Richard Hayes, 39 years old, millionaire investor, tailored navy suit, one hand inside his pocket. Watching, Emily felt her chest tighten. Richard was supposed to be in Chicago for meetings. That was the excuse. That was always the excuse. Meetings, flights, late dinners, delays, strange phone calls. Emily looked at him carefully. Richard didn't seem surprised to see Vanessa there. Worse, he looked comfortable. Richard, Emily said quietly. For a moment he didn't answer. Then his lips slowly curled upward into a smile that somehow felt colder than silence itself. Emily. Vanessa pushed away from the wall and walked forward. You know, she said with a small laugh. I kept wondering when we'd finally run into each other. Emily stared at her. Something inside her stomach tightened. Not fear exactly. Something stranger. The feeling people get seconds before a thunderstorm breaks. Around them, life inside Memorial Hospital continued moving normally. Phones rang. Nurses walked past carrying charts. Someone laughed near the elevators. But suddenly Emily felt like all the sounds had moved far away. Richard looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at Emily. And at the very end of the hallway, standing near the elevators beneath the glowing floor numbers, a man had just stepped through the opening doors. He stood perfectly still, watching. Emily followed Richard's eyes for a second before turning back toward the elevators, but the man standing there had already disappeared into the flow of hospital traffic. A nurse pushing a medication cart crossed in front of her. 2 doctors walked past discussing patient charts. Whatever she thought she saw was gone. Vanessa tilted her head slightly and smiled. You look tired, she said softly. Hospital beds do not really bring out anyone's best look. Emily said nothing. She felt another movement beneath her hand. The baby shifted again, stronger this time. Dr. Lawson had warned her that stress could affect blood pressure levels and cause complications if she did not slow down. Slow down. Rest. Stay calm. Emily repeated those words inside her head like a prayer while fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Richard finally took a step closer. Emily, we should talk. His voice sounded calm, controlled, almost rehearsed. Emily looked at him carefully. 3 years of marriage had taught her something important. Richard only sounded that calm when he wanted something. Talk? She asked quietly. Now. Richard exhaled slowly and glanced around the hallway. Do not do this here. Emily almost laughed at the irony. Do not do this here. Not in public. Not where people could see. Not where his image could crack. She remembered another hallway 6 months ago after a charity gala downtown. She had found a lipstick stain on Richard's collar while helping him remove his jacket after they got home. She remembered standing in their kitchen under warm lights while rain tapped against the windows outside. "Whose is it?" she had asked softly. Richard barely looked up from his phone. "You are imagining things." She remembered another moment 2 months later. A dinner reservation charged to their joint account at a restaurant Richard claimed he had never visited. Then another. Then hotel receipts during business trips that somehow lasted one night longer than planned. Small things. Tiny fractures. Little cracks spreading through a picture-perfect life. Emily stared at Richard now and realized something that hurt more than anger. She was no longer surprised. Vanessa stepped closer and folded her arms. "You know," she said casually, "I always wondered what kind of woman ignores signs for so long." Richard looked at her briefly. "Vanessa," but there was no warning in his voice. No concern. Emily noticed that immediately. Vanessa noticed it too. Her smile widened slightly. Around them the hallway suddenly felt smaller. The monitor sound seemed louder. Beep, beep, beep. Emily took a slow breath and looked directly at Richard. "Why are you here?" For a moment Richard did not answer. Then he looked down at her stomach before meeting her eyes again. Something cold passed across his expression. Something distant. "I came because we need to discuss what happens next." Emily blinked. "What happens next?" Richard adjusted his suit jacket and glanced toward the waiting area. "Emily, things have changed." The words landed softly, but they felt heavy. Very heavy. Like hearing a weather warning moments before a storm hits land. Vanessa looked away toward the windows overlooking downtown and smiled to herself. Emily felt a chill move through her body even though the hallway felt warm. Somewhere nearby a nurse called for assistance. Elevator doors opened again with a quiet ding. Emily looked up instinctively. And this time she saw him again. The same man from before. Gray suit. Broad shoulders. Silver hair. Standing completely still near the elevator doors with his eyes fixed on Richard Hayes. Emily stared toward the elevators again, but this time the man did not look away. People moved around him carrying coffee cups and folders and medical charts. But somehow he stood untouched by the movement around him like the center of a storm nobody else noticed yet. Emily narrowed her eyes slightly. There was something familiar about him. Not his face exactly. Something else. The way he stood. The calm expression. The posture of someone who never rushed because he had never spent his life chasing anyone or anything. Then Richard stepped closer, and his voice pulled her attention back. "Emily." She looked at him again. "What exactly are you trying to say?" Richard slipped both hands into his pockets and exhaled slowly. His expression looked almost sympathetic now. Almost. Emily hated that look. Over the last 6 months, she had learned that Richard wore emotions the same way he wore expensive suits. Perfectly fitted for the occasion. Vanessa leaned against the wall nearby and looked at her phone as if she were bored. As if none of this involved her at all. Emily suddenly remembered another phone. Another screen. Another night. 3 months earlier, she had been sitting alone inside their kitchen at almost midnight waiting for Richard to come home from another business dinner. Rain had tapped softly against the windows while the clock above the stove slowly moved toward 1 in the morning. Richard had texted her around 9:30. "Running late. Big client meeting. Do not wait up." Emily remembered smiling at the message back then. She trusted him completely. Trusted him enough to bring him coffee during late work nights. Trusted him enough to leave her career behind after they married because Richard promised they were building something together. Building a future together. Building a family together. Then his tablet lit up beside her on the kitchen counter. Just once. One small sound. One small notification. She had not meant to look. She still remembered that feeling. The hesitation. The guilt. The tiny voice inside her saying do not do it. But then she saw the message appear across the screen. "Thank you for tonight. I already miss you." Followed by a red heart. Emily remembered staring at it for several seconds without breathing. Her first thought had not been anger. Her first thought had been confusion. Because people never expect earthquakes while standing inside their own homes. She remembered unlocking the screen with Richard's birthday. He used the same passcode for everything. She remembered photographs, dinner reservations, hotel confirmations, smiling pictures taken in places Richard claimed he had visited alone. Then Vanessa's face appeared. Again, and again, and again. Emily remembered sitting in silence until Richard walked through the front door 45 minutes later. He smiled when he saw her. Smiled exactly the same way he was smiling now. "You are still awake?" he had asked casually while hanging his coat near the door. Emily remembered holding up the tablet with shaking hands. Richard looked at the screen, then at her, then shrugged. Shrugged. Emily, he said softly that night. You are overreacting. Back in Memorial Hospital, Emily felt her chest tighten as the memory returned with perfect clarity. Overreacting. Strange how lies always sounded calm when spoken by the people who caused the damage. Beep, beep, beep. The monitor sound suddenly seemed louder again. Richard looked down at her with unreadable eyes while Vanessa smiled toward the windows. And near the elevators, the silver-haired man finally started walking toward them. The sound of approaching footsteps mixed with the distant hum of hospital ventilation and the rolling wheels of a passing medical cart. Emily watched the silver-haired man move closer through the hallway crowd. He did not seem hurried. He did not seem confused. He simply walked with the calm certainty of someone arriving exactly where he intended to be. Richard noticed him too. Emily saw it happen. Just a slight movement in Richard's eyes. A small pause. Then gone. His expression returned to normal almost instantly. Vanessa straightened and folded her arms tighter across her chest. So, she said with a light laugh, are we all going to stand here pretending? Emily looked at her. Pretending what? Vanessa tilted her head. That none of us know what is happening. Richard sighed quietly and rubbed the bridge of his nose like a man dealing with a minor inconvenience. Emily hated that gesture too. He always did it during arguments, during difficult conversations, during moments where he wanted people to think he was the patient one, the reasonable one. Emily, Richard said carefully, this is already difficult enough. Emily stared at him. Difficult enough. Those words settled into her chest and stayed there. Difficult for who? Difficult for the woman spending 3 nights alone in a hospital room? Difficult for the woman who sat awake staring at empty space while her husband disappeared into meetings that no longer existed? Difficult for the person carrying a child while wondering when her marriage had quietly disappeared? Vanessa took 2 slow steps closer. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor. Click, click. Emily suddenly noticed that nurses passing through the hallway had begun looking over for brief moments before continuing. Nothing dramatic, just small curious glances. The way people notice tension before they understand it. Vanessa smiled. I guess I should say thank you. Emily frowned slightly. For what? Vanessa looked toward Richard for a moment before meeting Emily's eyes again. For making things easier. Silence. Emily blinked once, then twice. She looked toward Richard, expecting him to interrupt, expecting him to finally say enough. He did not. He simply stood there, looking at the floor for 1 second, looking at the ceiling the next, looking anywhere except directly at his wife. Emily suddenly felt cold despite the warm air circulating through the building. 3 years together, and she understood something in that moment without needing anyone to explain it. Richard was not stopping this because he did not want to stop it. Beep, beep, beep. Somewhere behind them a monitor alarm sounded briefly before stopping again. Emily felt another small movement beneath her hand. The baby shifted once more, almost like a tiny reminder. Still here, still with you. She lowered her eyes for a second and took a slow breath. Then she looked back at Richard. Tell me the truth. Her voice was quiet, very quiet. Richard looked at her, finally looked directly at her. But before he could answer, another voice entered the space between them. Excuse me. All 3 turned. The silver-haired man had reached them. Up close, he looked around 60 years old with sharp blue eyes and a face marked by years rather than age. His gray suit looked expensive but understated. No flashy watch. No dramatic smile. Just calm. Vanessa looked confused. Richard narrowed his eyes slightly. The man glanced toward Emily first. Something softened in his expression for a fraction of a second. Then he looked back at Richard. I believe, he said evenly. You have been talking long enough. Silence settled across the hallway for exactly 2 seconds. 2 very long seconds. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead while distant elevator doors opened and closed somewhere behind them. Richard stared at the silver-haired man with narrowed eyes, as if searching through memories he could not quite place. Vanessa looked him up and down once, then twice, her expression shifting from confusion to irritation. Emily stood completely still. Something inside her chest had changed the moment he spoke. She could not explain why. Sometimes instincts arrive before understanding does. Richard finally straightened his shoulders and forced a polite smile onto his face. I am sorry, he said carefully. Have we met? The man looked at him calmly. No smile. No tension. Just calm. No, he said. But I know who you are. Richard glanced toward Emily for a fraction of a second before looking back again. Emily noticed it immediately. Richard always checked reactions. Always measured rooms. Always calculated situations before deciding how to play them. Vanessa stepped forward first. This is a private conversation. Her voice sounded sharp but controlled. Family matter. The silver-haired man turned his eyes toward her. Is it? He asked quietly. Vanessa folded her arms tighter. Excuse me. Emily felt the air around them becoming heavier somehow. Not louder. Heavier. More people were beginning to notice now. A nurse slowed while passing. A man sitting near the waiting area lowered his newspaper. Two visitors carrying flowers glanced over before continuing down the hallway. Tiny movements. Tiny reactions. The kind people make before they realize they are watching something important happen. Richard cleared his throat and placed one hand gently on Emily's shoulder. Emily immediately stiffened beneath his touch. Emily and I are discussing personal matters. His voice softened. Nothing more. The silver-haired man looked down at Richard's hand resting on Emily's shoulder. Then he looked back at Richard. Interesting choice, he said evenly. Richard blinked. What does that mean? No answer came immediately. Instead, the man turned slightly toward Emily. His expression softened again for only a second. How are you feeling? Emily frowned. I am sorry. Your chart mentioned elevated stress and blood pressure concerns. Emily stared at him. Richard stared too. Vanessa's expression changed instantly. Emily felt it happen beside her without even turning to look. Richard slowly removed his hand from her shoulder. How exactly would you know that? He asked. The silver-haired man remained perfectly still. Around them, the sounds of Memorial Hospital continued like normal life, refusing to stop. Telephones rang. Wheels rolled across floors. Distant voices called room numbers. Beep, beep, beep. Then another sound entered the space. Footsteps. Quick footsteps. Emily turned toward the nurse's station, where a young nurse in blue scrubs was walking rapidly toward them, holding a clipboard against her chest. She looked directly at the silver-haired man. Sir, she said quietly, stopping beside him. Administration asked me to tell you they are ready upstairs. Richard's forehead tightened. Vanessa looked confused. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. The nurse handed the clipboard over carefully. The silver-haired man thanked her and glanced briefly at the papers before handing them back. Then he looked at Richard again. I believe, he said calmly, that you were about to explain something. Richard stared at him. Vanessa stared at him. Emily stared at him. Because suddenly one strange thought appeared inside her mind and refused to leave. People did not speak to ordinary visitors that way inside hospitals. They definitely did not call administration meetings for ordinary visitors. And for the first time since Richard and Vanessa arrived, Emily noticed something else. The small gold badge attached near the man's suit pocket. William Carter, board chairman. Emily stared at the gold badge as if the letters had suddenly changed languages. William Carter, board chairman. Carter. Her heartbeat skipped once. Then again. The sounds around her faded for a moment beneath the rush of blood moving through her ears. No, that was impossible. Completely impossible. Richard looked confused first, then curious. Vanessa looked from William to Emily and back again. Slowly the smile disappeared from her face. Richard crossed his arms. Chairman, he asked carefully. William nodded once. Yes. Richard blinked twice and forced out a small laugh. Well, that explains the attention. He relaxed slightly, almost returning to his normal confident posture. Emily noticed it immediately. Richard was recalculating, repositioning, adjusting. She had watched him do this in business meetings hundreds of times. If he could not overpower a situation, he adapted to it. Mr. Carter, Richard said smoothly, extending his hand. Richard Hayes. I own Hayes Capital Partners. William looked at the offered hand, then looked back at Richard's face. 3 seconds passed. 4. Richard slowly lowered his arm. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably beside him. Emily stood frozen. Carter. The last name echoed through her head again and again. Memories moved through her mind like flashes of old photographs. Childhood birthdays. Empty chairs at school performances. Her mother changing subjects whenever Emily asked questions. A small framed picture she once found in a box when she was 13. A younger man standing beside her mother outside a courthouse. Dark suit. Blue blue eyes, silver beginning at his temples. Emily remembered asking who he was. Her mother had taken the picture away immediately. Some people belong in the past, she had said quietly. Emily looked at William again. The eyes, the posture, the calm expression. Suddenly pieces began fitting together in ways that made her stomach tighten. Vanessa looked toward Richard. Wait, she said softly. Carter. Richard frowned. What? Vanessa looked at Emily now. Really looked at her for the first time since arriving. Emily saw the change happen in real time. Saw realization slowly appear behind Vanessa's eyes. No way, Vanessa whispered. Richard looked confused. What are you talking about? Vanessa stepped closer to him and lowered her voice, but not enough. William Carter donated $30 million to Memorial 2 years ago. Richard's expression changed instantly. Emily watched the color shift slightly in his face. Tiny, barely visible. But there. William remained completely still. Around them the hallway moved normally. A volunteer pushed flowers past the waiting room entrance. A nurse laughed softly near the reception desk. Somewhere far away a monitor alarm sounded briefly before stopping. Life continued while 4 people stood in the middle of a moment none of them had expected. Richard cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, he said carefully, I think there may be some misunderstanding here. William looked at him calmly. Do you? Richard smiled again, but this smile looked different. Smaller, less certain. Emily and I are handling private family matters. William glanced toward Emily for a long moment before speaking. Family. His voice remained quiet. Interesting word. Emily felt her chest tighten. She stared at William, and for the first time since he arrived, she saw something beneath the calm expression. Regret. Very small. Very controlled. But there. Then William looked directly at her. Not at Richard. Not at Vanessa. Just her. And when he finally spoke, Emily forgot to breathe. Emily, he said softly. Your mother told me you had her eyes. She was right. Emily felt the world around her become strangely quiet. Not silent. Just distant. Like someone had lowered the volume of everything except her own heartbeat. Beep. 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 The monitor sounds down the hallway still echoed softly. Nurses still moved through Memorial Hospital carrying charts and coffee cups. Elevator doors still opened and closed. Life kept moving. But Emily stood perfectly still staring at William Carter as 1,000 questions crashed into her mind all at once. Richard looked from William to Emily and back again. His expression had completely changed now. The confidence was still there, but cracks had started appearing beneath it. Tiny cracks. The kind people only notice if they have spent years watching someone carefully. Vanessa looked uncomfortable for the first time since arriving. Emily noticed her shifting weight slightly from one foot to the other. Richard cleared his throat. Emily, he said carefully, you never mentioned. His voice faded, because suddenly he realized there was no safe ending to that sentence. You never mentioned your father? You never mentioned Memorial Hospital? You never mentioned power? Emily slowly looked toward him. Something strange happened inside her then. Something calm. For weeks, she had felt sadness, confusion, fear, questions that kept her awake at night staring into darkness, while Richard slept beside her pretending nothing had changed. But now for the first time in months, she felt something else beginning to rise beneath all of it. Clarity. William looked at Emily quietly. I know this is not how this should happen, he said softly. Believe me. Emily stared at him. You knew who I was? William nodded once. For years. Richard blinked. Wait. He looked confused again. Years? William finally looked toward him. Yes. Richard stared. Vanessa stared. Emily stared. William exhaled slowly and folded his hands in front of him. Your mother and I made mistakes a very long time ago, he said. She decided to leave. She wanted distance. She wanted privacy. I respected that choice even when I hated it. Emily felt tears begin pressing behind her eyes. Her mother had passed away 3 years earlier. Cancer. Fast. Aggressive. Emily remembered sitting beside her hospital bed during those final weeks holding her hand while machines hummed around them. She remembered asking one last time, was there ever someone else? Her mother had smiled weakly and brushed Emily's hair away from her face. One day, she whispered, things that belong hidden find their way home. Emily never understood what that meant until now. Richard shifted awkwardly beside her. Mr. Carter, he said carefully. With respect, I think there is a lot happening here emotionally. William looked at him without expression. There certainly is. Richard forced another smile. Maybe Emily and I should have some space to discuss things privately. Emily turned toward him slowly. Very slowly. Space. Space. She remembered that word too. Richard wanted space when she asked about missing weekends. Space when she questioned strange text messages. Space when she cried after finding restaurant receipts hidden inside his jacket pocket. Space had always meant distance. Distance had always meant avoidance. Emily looked directly into his eyes and noticed something she had not seen before. Fear. Small. Hidden. But there. Before she could speak, another voice came from behind them. Chairman Carter? Everyone turned. A hospital security officer approached, holding a tablet in one hand. He looked serious. Very serious. Sir, he said quietly, we found the hallway footage you requested. You should probably see this now. The hallway suddenly felt smaller. Not physically smaller. Just heavier. Like the air itself had become difficult to move through. Emily looked toward the security officer standing beside William with the tablet held carefully against his chest. Richard's expression tightened immediately. Tiny movement. Tiny reaction. Emily almost missed it. Almost. But years of marriage had taught her how to recognize changes in him that nobody else ever noticed. Vanessa looked confused again. Footage? She asked quickly. The officer glanced toward William before answering. Yes, ma'am. Richard stepped forward almost instantly. I think there has been some misunderstanding. His voice sounded smooth again, but now Emily could hear it. That slight strain underneath. That small pressure in the words. William looked at him calmly. Interesting, he said quietly. You seem concerned. Richard laughed softly. Too softly. Concerned. He adjusted his suit jacket. Not at all. Vanessa crossed her arms and forced out a smile. This is ridiculous. Emily looked between them carefully. A few minutes earlier Vanessa had looked confident. Relaxed. Untouchable. But now she kept glancing toward the tablet. Then toward Richard. Then back toward the tablet again. Tiny movements. Tiny fears. Beep. 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 Somewhere farther down the hallway another monitor alarm sounded briefly before stopping again. A doctor pushed through double doors carrying patient charts. Visitors passed nearby speaking quietly to one another. Life continued moving while something beneath the surface had completely shifted. William extended his hand toward the security officer. Let me see it. The officer handed over the tablet immediately. Emily watched William's eyes move slowly across the screen. His expression did not change. Not even slightly. That somehow felt worse. Richard shifted beside her. Vanessa swallowed. Emily noticed that too. Seconds passed. Then William looked up. Silence. Complete silence. Emily felt her heartbeat climbing again. Richard forced another smile. Well, William looked directly at him. This hallway footage starts 40 minutes before you arrive. Richard blinked once. Okay. William looked down briefly at the screen again. It shows Emily leaving her room and walking toward the nurse's station. Emily frowned slightly. Richard nodded. And William looked back up. It also shows you entering Memorial Hospital 23 minutes later. Richard's expression remained controlled. That makes sense. William continued. But your meeting in Chicago ended yesterday afternoon. Silence. Richard froze. Just for a second. Just long enough. Emily stared at him slowly. Vanessa looked at Richard immediately. What? Richard looked toward her quickly. Do not. But she was already staring at him now. Yesterday, she repeated quietly. William held the tablet calmly in his hand. Interesting thing about hospitals, he said evenly. Everything has timestamps. Richard's jaw tightened. Emily suddenly remembered the flight confirmation she accidentally saw on Richard's laptop 2 weeks ago. Return flight. Yesterday evening. Not tomorrow morning. Yesterday. Her chest tightened as realization moved through her like cold water. Richard had never gone to Chicago today. Richard had lied before he even walked into Memorial Hospital. Vanessa looked at him again. Really looked at him. You told me you landed this morning. Richard turned toward her sharply. Vanessa. But it was already happening. Tiny fractures becoming cracks. Cracks becoming breaks. Emily stared at Richard while something inside her slowly settled into place. Because suddenly she understood something important. People who tell one lie almost always forget where the first lie began. Richard stared at William Carter for several seconds without speaking. The polished confidence that had followed him through boardrooms and interviews and charity events seemed to be slipping piece by piece right there beneath Memorial Hospital lights. Emily watched it happen in silence. Strange enough, She did not feel satisfaction. Not yet. She only felt tired. Very tired. Vanessa stepped backward slowly and looked at Richard with narrowed eyes. "You said you were in Chicago," she repeated quietly. Richard exhaled sharply. "Vanessa, stop." "No." Her voice rose slightly. "Do not tell me to stop." Nearby, two nurses glanced over before continuing toward the elevators. A volunteer paused beside the waiting area coffee station and then kept walking. The world still moved around them, but the center of everything had shifted. William lowered the tablet and looked directly at Richard. "There is something else." Richard closed his eyes briefly. Emily noticed it immediately. Tiny reaction. Tiny fear. William continued calmly. Hospital security footage also captured audio in the waiting area. Silence. Richard looked up instantly. Vanessa turned pale. Emily felt the air leave her lungs. William handed the tablet to the security officer beside him. The officer tapped the screen once. Then a voice echoed softly through the hallway speakers. Richard's voice. Clear. Calm. Unmistakable. "After today, everything changes. No more complications." Then Vanessa's voice followed. "Are you sure she suspects anything?" Silence filled the hallway afterward. Heavy silence. Richard stared at the floor. Vanessa stared at Richard. Emily stared at both of them. Suddenly pieces she had spent months trying to understand no longer felt scattered. They fit. Every missed dinner. Every canceled trip. Every distant conversation. Every lie. Richard slowly lifted his eyes toward Emily. "Emily." His voice sounded smaller now. "I can explain." Emily looked at him quietly. She remembered standing beside him during business launches, sitting beside him at charity galas, holding his hand during difficult moments, defending him when people doubted him, building dreams beside him one ordinary day at a time. Then she looked down at her hand resting beneath her stomach. The baby shifted softly beneath her palm. Small movement, gentle movement, real movement. Emily looked back at Richard and realized something. She no longer needed explanations. William stepped beside her. Not close enough to pressure her, just close enough to stand there. The security officer adjusted the tablet and spoke quietly into his radio. Moments later, two uniformed officers appeared at the far end of the hallway, walking calmly toward them. Richard looked up immediately. Vanessa looked terrified now. "Wait," Richard said quickly. "This is ridiculous." One of the officers stopped nearby. "Mr. Hayes, Miss Cole, we need to speak with both of you regarding hospital security concerns and statements provided today." Richard looked at William, then at Emily, then back again. But nobody moved. Nobody rescued him. Nobody fixed it. For the first time in his life, Richard Hayes looked like a man standing alone. Weeks later, autumn sunlight poured softly through the windows of Emily's apartment while tiny wind chimes moved outside the balcony door. A sleeping newborn rested peacefully against her chest beneath a pale blue blanket. On the television across the room, a news anchor discussed investigations and business resignations and legal proceedings involving Hayes Capital Partners. Emily reached for the remote quietly and turned the television off. The room became silent again. She looked down at her child sleeping peacefully against her heartbeat and smiled softly. Some people spend their entire lives chasing power only to discover too late that the things worth keeping were already in their hands.